I sent you that photo of the farmers protesting out here, right?
Yeah, two tractors. Was it?
Oh no, it was a lot. It was a lot of people. It was so gross. It was just like, I don't know. I'm becoming very anti-tractor, or not anti-tractor. I'm pro-tractor. Murray Bookchin is pro-tractor. I'll say that right now.
Small
Comes out as fervently pro-tractor. Yeah, small
tractors.
tractors.
Yeah.
Maybe tractors of varying sizes, versatile tractors. I'm becoming very anti-farmer, I think. As deletes the farmers out here, whenever I think about them, I just am like, it's just the guy from Top Gear, like despicable petty bourgeois people with like Union Jacks. I don't know. Maybe that comes from working at the supply store for farmers and all of them just like hassling me for not like loading their cow pellets fast enough. But yeah, coming out as anti-farmer, I think on this one.
That's fine. There was I mean, this is not a thing this is neither a thing that it's easy, it's hard to be against, nor is it a class of person that it's hard to hate. But fox hunting was in the news recently.
Really?
Yeah.
To what end?
Unsurprisingly, a fox hunting hunt in Warwickshire have made some kind of. They were initially. The police gave them some kind of injunction to prevent them from going on main roads and generally disrupting the lives of people.
What is this? What is it? What like groups of them?
So what they were? Yeah. So they. I mean, the fox hunts are organised into hunts, and they were obliged by law to tell the police what route they were going to follow, because under the ostensible fox hunting ban that came in fucking 20 odd years ago, or whatever, it made it. I mean, it's already like a stupid like performance farce like thing, right? But I think it very deliberately like tried to create some strict boundaries on what it is they're actually allowed to do, and obviously they're not allowed to do some of the more horrific things,
crucifying foxes along the roads.
Actually let dogs kill foxes.
Jesus Christ.
But also I think they're supposed to follow pre-prepared routes and like follow pre-laid scents and this kind of thing. But basically the sort of like the toffs of Warwickshire, our betters, our class betters, have just been like blocking roads and like blocking traffic. It's funny, isn't it? Right? If you're going to protest by blocking traffic, you go to prison. Whereas if you're a fox hunter and you're like driving your pack of foxes across a road, then it's perfectly fine. Anyway, it turned out that the hunt in Warwickshire had made some kind of backdoor deal with the police to get them out of any. Basically, they made a deal whereby they're not obliged to do anything for the police. They're not obliged to tell anybody what they're planning to do, and all of this increased attention on Warwickshire hunt and their backdoor dealings with the police also came with a reminder that foxing hunts obviously continue to breach the fox hunting ban and do all the horrible things that they were meant to be trying to stop them from doing in killing foxes.
Well, what are the cops getting out of all of this? Fox meat? Like what
maybe some kind of strange dog economy. And no, it's just it's wealth and privilege buys privilege and immunity from the law.
From the anti-fox hunt laws.
Anyway, my
this
point
country.
is, I'm just adding. I mean, they're the same class of person, aren't they? But like, I'm adding the rich landowners in with the petty bourgeois farmers as like all despicable. And I think what we should do is the only way to abolish the distinction between town and country is to just make everything town. Is that right? Just like,
that's what I learned from this reading. That's what I learned. If anybody wants to live in a city, too bad.
Yeah, we get rid of
town.
cities, we get rid of countries. We just have towns.
I don't know. Listen, I have on this podcast in the past been decisively anti-fox, just in terms of what they do to my allotment. But it's not. That's more of an abstract frustration, you know. So I'm not actually anti-fox.
Yeah.
Fox hunting is just such a. It's I don't know. It's very odd. Just go do something else. It's very very odd. Maybe I mean it's probably just because they're getting told they can't do it, and it's like, oh look at me getting all dressed up and going on my little fox hunt. But I don't know. It's very lame.
Yeah, I mean
it's very lame.
It's an extension of like pomp and ceremony, which I mean, that kind of activity tradition binds any social group together, and it's just binding this particularly degenerate class of person into a coherent class.
So what you're saying,
they sort of dress up and ride their horses around and,
blow foxes' heads off.
Yeah.
God,
if only. I mean, Jack. If only.
Oh God, I don't know.
Yeah.
What you're saying, Dan, is that we need socialist fox hunting to cohere us as a class. That is how you make the class for itself divide. Socialist fox hunting ideology. It coheres the class, makes us ready for battle. What are we gonna do?
No, I think we arm the foxes. This is
yes, arm the foxes. That's badass. Arm the goddamn foxes. Yeah. The one thing that bothered me for the listener out here where I am in England, in this city, I guess is what an English person would call it, but it's a town. There was a very large protest at the weekend for farmers. I don't know, protesting about like monopoly capital, if I had to guess, protesting about the rising prices of everything, protesting about how difficult it is to be a petty bourgeois farmer. And every single person on the streets was like cheering them on. And I was just like, no, no, don't cheer these people on. The like tractors were just like covered in Union Jack bunting. I was just like, I felt so sick. What are you going to do? Anyways. We need a social ecology, some might say, Dan, to solve this divide. We usually, when we were talking about what we were going to read for this week, Bookchin got brought up, and you were like, well, maybe we can't do Bookchin because we always just do Bookchin when we can't think of anything else. And this was like a coherent plan to like
New Year, New Us. Yeah.
New Year, New Us. Listen, we had to read about quantum physics last time. This, you know, I think I needed a bit of a breather. Although this wound up being longer than I thought it was going to be, but anyways, it is what it is.
I mean, it's good. It's good to touch base with. I think maybe it's the kind of like, oh God, I can't think of the right analogy, but like it's kind of the litmus test for where auxiliary statements is at. We just sort of revisit Murray Bookchin, our like baseline, and see how far we've diverged, or how
see
much
what we
issue
criticize
we
him
take with
for,
it, or like
see what we like. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I thoroughly enjoyed this. We'll get into. Well, okay. What we read was a Murray Bookchin essay called
Liberatory Technology.
Is it just called Liberatory? Towards a Liberatory Technology. Where this is something we haven't really touched on for the show, is like a philosophy of technology and like where we should stand as good communists towards this, you know, abstract entity that is technology and progress and all of this stuff. And so we read a Murray Bookchin essay from 1965 where he spends half of it being like, the digital computer can bring us socialism. Which were some of the more unhelpful parts. But in spite of that, classic Bookchin, he says a lot of things where you're like, I don't know if that's correct. I don't know if the way you're talking about Marx is actually correct. But then he has so many insights that it's just like, my man, so good. This is why he's a useful baseline, because it's just like easy to understand. He's there. He's just sitting there. It's Murray Bookchin. He's every communist's favorite anarchist, I think is probably fair to say.
Yeah, like obviously it ends with sort of quite a beautiful advocacy for technology and how it relates to human beings, and like attempting to describe some kind of like synthesis that could be the sort of like revolutionary overcoming of a contradiction that exists in human society as it stands at the moment. He also does that thing where like maybe it's by virtue of the fact that he's like we've probably said this before, but by virtue of the fact that he's somebody who takes on board questions of ecology and societal relationships to the environment quite early on in relation to how sort of like the social discourse and the sort of broad sections of the left begin to relate to that question as we get toward the end of the 20th century, and now here we stand, climate change being what it is. Like, he has this like he isn't he feels like he's like free of lots of dogmas, you know, like he will champion and celebrate technology or development or growth or something, whilst at the same time framing it in the context of a really fundamental social change, which is also tinged with like sort of like almost like hippie-ish language, you know. I mean, like like he's your classic, like, we've certainly said this before, but like he's your classic example of what Jason W. Moore would criticize as like traditional ecological thinking, seeking the synthesis between and the renewal of or the sort of recreation of the relationship between human beings and the nature that we've diverged from at some point. But yeah, I don't know.
I'm still, every time he gets into that stuff though, I'm still always like, maybe I'm sold. Maybe it's pretty good. Because he, you know, he'll be like the first person to say, you know, don't be an environmentalist, be an ecologist, right? Like, don't think of how we can sustainably exploit nature, right? Because, you know, he looks around and he sees Nixon doing that and he sees the Soviet Union doing that. And so he goes, you know, that's what Stalin thought. That's what Lenin thought. That must be what Marx thought, I think. And so he does kind of damn all kind of communist and socialist thought with this kind of like anti-ecological bent. But I don't know, whenever he starts talking about that, like renewal of the relationship between nature and humanity, as ahistorical as it might be, I think maybe first and foremost, he's kind of a propagandist and he thought of himself like that. Like it's just, this stuff is very not elite. Like you can just give this to anybody and they go, oh, wow, pretty cool. And I think that he recognizes that and that's what he's writing for. And so maybe in there somewhere, because it's not as like academic or whatever as we're used to, he makes some compromises towards like, what would this relationship look like? I don't know. You know, picture a farmer. You know what I mean? Like picture how the farmer knows when the equinox is or whatever. And that to him is like returning to this apotheosis of humanity's relationship to nature. So I don't know. I kind of cut him some slack there just because I think he is a propagandist and an agitator first and foremost. But yeah, you're right.
Yeah, I mean, he's clearly like quite a dialectical thinker, right? And there is something very evolutionary and emergent about what he's proposing, rather than being sort of regressive or a return or looking back on some kind of like lost synthesis. You know, it's like a he's definitely seeking out the modern synthesis of communism rather than like being in any way a primitivist, you know. So.
Yeah, well, exactly. I was just about to say that too. Like he's not anti-tech either, which is funny because I feel like a lot of like, you know, like primitivist anarchist people like Murray Bookchin, but it's like Murray Bookchin would be the first person to tell you technology is actually good. So I think we're framing this like it's an essay about ecology. It's not. It's just Murray Bookchin writing about a subject and being like ecology is incredibly important, which is why we love Murray Bookchin, among other reasons. But this is an essay about technology, right? And about how we need to relate to technology. Because on one hand, you kind of have the like hyper technological determinism of a lot of like liberals and some socialists too, where it's like, hey, just get a bigger computer to plan everything, right? And on the other hand, you have primitivists, I guess, right? Who are just like, there's been somebody around town putting up tags, graffiti tags that say actualize industrial collapse. And it's like, I remember when I was 15. You know what I mean? But it's like, you know, obviously that's not the kind of world we want to return to. We don't want to just destroy all technology. But a lot of people recognize that technology is complicit in our domination. But Bookchin is like, you have to ask why, you have to ask how. So this is interesting. I mentioned that this was written 60 years ago, almost exactly. And I think that's worth keeping in mind because this read almost like a historical piece. Like, what did people in the Bronx in 1960, like, how did Americans view technology as they were competing with the Soviet Union, as, you know, America had these, like, you know, Pan Am had these huge planes going all around the planet. And Bookchin kind of says that at that time, people were actually getting kind of disillusioned with technology, which I wasn't expecting him to say. He kind of makes the point that, like, leading up to that time period with Stalinism and industrialization, ever since, basically, I guess he kind of says, ever since the Industrial Revolution, people identified technology with progress. And he's saying back then that's starting to fall apart. And when I first read that, I was like, I don't know, because I feel like now it's almost come back around the other way, where a lot of people kind of view technology as the savior and are like, well, nothing else has worked, so hopefully AI will just make it so I don't have to go to work. You know what I mean? And, like, on one hand, like, I get
but in
it,
like a good way, not in like a bad way.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah.
It's the good not going to work where I get the UBI, not the bad
exactly.
not going to work where, like,
Yeah.
I have to go back and live with my parents or whatever.
Yeah, but that's the thing, right? It's like, I think it's a lot more complicated now, because on one hand you have stuff like AI or the iPhone, which promise to, like, revolutionize productivity and make it so that, you know, you'll have to work so fewer hours and it'll be so much easier when you do have to work. But it's like, in reality now, like, everyone knows when you use AI to write an email, and all they use AI for is, like, widgets on Teams to make sure that, you know, to check who writes emails faster, right? Or bullshit like that. But then, like, I don't know, I'm interested to know how you think about this, because, like, on the other hand, there have been in our lifetimes, like, really massive technological achievements in spite of capitalism's, you know, the crisis of physics or whatever, to borrow a cultural phrase from last episode. Like, the thing it made me think of was, like, hormone therapy, right? Where it's like, whoa, that's like everyone, unless you're like a chud, everyone recognizes the liberatory potential of something like that. And it's huge, it's real. But something like AI just isn't, or at least not right now, not under capitalism. And so it's kind of like, I don't know what you think about this, but it's like, it doesn't seem as clear as Bookchin's time. It seems like it's a lot more complicated, where, like, people are just kind of picking their technology that they think is going to be liberatory to have some kind of technological determinism. For me, it's no-till farming.
But... I mean, AI is a funny one, right? Because you can celebrate it, or you can be terrified of it, or both, I suppose. And in some ways, what AI encapsulates is what Murray Bookchin's talking about as being this period of that he's identifying in the kind of, like, mid part of the 20th century, where technology tended to have this sort of, like, two faces, one which was, like, liberatory and one which was apocalyptic in some ways, and it was quite hard to distinguish. I don't know enough about AI from what I've heard. Like, I sort of wonder from what cultural and social and potentially ideological genesis point this narrative of AI is coming. One of the things that, if Murray Bookchin were alive right now, I would imagine he would be, like, rhapsodizing about would be 3D printing. He'd be obsessed with, like, additive production. I think would be, like, Murray Bookchin's real kick if he were if he was still going. Part of what I've absorbed vis-a-vis technology and my understanding of it is that, kind of, like, there is a narrative which says, perhaps other than, like, advances in biosciences, there is a narrative which says we haven't really actually had a huge number of large technical advances since the 1940s, really. Like, it's just we've sort of perfected and advanced the sort of microprocessor or whatever. We've perfected and advanced, I don't know, the jet engine and aviation and these kind of things. I mean, maybe quantum computing, maybe graphene or whatever, some kind of new building materials. Maybe,
if I had to guess, I feel like Murray Bookchin
AI
is not, like, up on his quantum mechanics research, if I just had to go out there and guess.
But I mean now, right? I'm just like, are there vis-a-vis our present moment, where do we stand in relation to technology? Murray Bookchin is writing this essay on the cusp of at least he's identifying a moment, whether it's a moment that actually existed or not, I don't know. But he's identifying a moment where technology transitions from being something almost being like a tool which extends and develops the bourgeoisie's ability to conquer and utilize and impoverish and diminish the labor of the proletariat. He talks about the period sort of like in the at the basically the first half of the 20th century sort of identifies a failed potential in technology, and one which both in the US and the Western world, but then also in the Soviet Union, has come to be something which workers across the world are enslaved to, where their labor is combined with purely to create more surplus value, and where their experience of work is diminished, and where their alienation by relationship to technology is increased dramatically. And then he seems to be he's trying to identify some trends in the middle of the 20th century where this process is changing, and maybe technology is becoming liberatory once again. Its capacity to reduce work, its capacity to reduce the requirement for human labor in the production, in social production, rather than enhance it, is increasing. Now, here we stand 60 years on from that potential development and change in where we stand vis-a-vis technology and its liberatory potential and its potential to eliminate sort of toil and material want from human existence. Are we still in the same place he was 50 years ago? I don't know.
I mean, to a certain extent, we are, but with more technology, if that makes sense. Yeah. Because it's like, hey, I don't know. It's like when the TV came around or when the internet came around, it was the same thing of, wow, mass communication within the blink of an eye. Anyone can communicate with anyone else. The marketplace of ideas, it's going to solve everything. But, Californian ideology, right? It's like what actually happens. It just gets subsumed into capitalism. And it just serves to perpetuate the social relations that we have, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, everything that we've ever read has warned against some kind of technological determinism where it's like, well, once we can just automate the factories enough, everything will be fine. It's like, well, once you automate the factories, then a bunch of people just don't have jobs and it's still capitalism. You know what I mean? Like, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. We've had 60 years of further development of this potentially liberatory technology in the total absence of any kind of revolutionary movement that's actually going to leverage it for social advancement, sort of like world historic social advancement kind of thing.
Yeah. And so basically exactly what you're saying is the point of this essay is him. It almost feels, he doesn't explicitly say this, it almost feels like he's actually writing this to kind of smack some sense into a lot of anarchists who are maybe around this time beginning to be like, technology, huh? I'm going to go listen to Earth Crisis and sit in my room and plot about destroying the machines. You know what I mean? But he's writing this to be like
30 years before Earth Crisis, I think.
Well, Earth Crisis transcends all generations, Dan. He's writing this, though, to be like, the point of this essay is we need to regain our views on how technology can be liberatory. And he's obviously not going to go so far as to have some kind of technologically determinist argument, but he is saying that throwing the baby out with the bathwater and being a primitivist or just reacting so much against technological determinism that you don't think about it at all is a huge mistake. And he's absolutely right? Like he hits the nail on the head where he says that technology, I think he calls it something like this, it is the structural support of any given society. And I don't know, to a certain extent, I'm kind of just like, maybe this is a lot of the stuff that socialists should just be reading. Not Murray Bookchin, although read Murray Bookchin. Like just specific proposals for actual socialist technologies and socialist systems and things like that. Because at a certain point, it's like, how many times can you have the transformation debate? How many times can you have the debate about the state or something like that? It's like, well, maybe it would actually be cool to just talk about what these things would look like. And try to envision them and maybe try and make some of them happen. That's a whole nother conversation. But it was very refreshing here to just see him come out and say, we need to be taking this stuff seriously. This is a huge part of any given society. and what technology will look like under socialism, and what good technology will look like, and what progress in technology will look like, to even like some seasoned commie, might actually look quite different than what you actually would expect. And typical Bookchin, go look at any book cover of a Murray Bookchin book. He's painting this picture of like, the trams rolling down the streets with the pigs on the side and the windmills and the all of this stuff. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. He paints this picture of communalism and stuff, and how like, technology can help there, which we'll get into. But it was refreshing. It was good, because oftentimes I'm kind of a Luddite. I'm just like, this shit, all this shit sucks. But yeah, you obviously can't have that. Yeah. Thinking.
Yeah. I mean, he's definitely an anarchist, right? Like, we know this, but also like he's very definitely an anarchist. He's incredibly heavily influenced by the traditions of mutual aid, and he has a very high regard, as you would have to do if you were an anarchist. He has a very high regard for human beings' innate social capacities, their likelihood to choose social solidarity over conflict with one another. Like, left to their inherent devices, they will be communalistic, build communal collective social structures. It's almost like presumed in a lot of his writing. So there's definitely that element going on, and it shines through very heavily. Kind of wanted to pick up what you said about like this not being a technologically determinist text, because yes, I think maybe what's missing in a lot of this is, and which is perfectly a liberty to leave out, right? What's presumed and not very heavily emphasized is a description of a transformation in social relations, and there's a question that hangs over me, is how does he reflect upon the distinction between like social relations and sort of material factors in the means of production, and which of those potentially dominate more the nature of the mode of production that we live in and under. And maybe some of that is left out because a lot of the social relation stuff is taken care of with the anarchism, right? It's just like the post-revolutionary transformation in social relations will just be a necessary and natural emergence of human beings' innate sociability, and it will come about out of the process of sort of revolution itself. It's almost like
it's totally like self-referential,
kind of like I don't know. Yeah,
it's the post-revolutionary social relations will be the post-revolutionary social relations.
Yeah,
you know what I mean? It's like, I mean,
yeah, cool. And at least he's not like. At least I feel like he does recognize it will be a dynamic, developing, ongoing process that is a continued interaction of sort of dialectically opposed parts, which synthesize in different ways and stuff. So it's he's not an undynamic thinker, but the other way that like this question of technological determinism shines through in this is the way that he describes, well, he is describing there being a development in there being a technological development which allows for the emergence of, or the possibility of, communist or socialist relations of production, right? We were talking about before, like he's saying there is something that's happened in technology in the middle of the 20th century that makes it possible for communism to come about. And he says that a lot of the politics of the 19th century were around wrestling with this issue of, okay, if we have a revolution, are we going to be able to overcome toil and material want? And are we going to be able to immediately overcome the necessity to disempower everyday workers because they toil under a productive process which is top down and sort of like command and control almost. And he's sort of saying that this is something which the which the revolutionary movements in the 19th century were really grappling with and never really came up with adequate answers to. And he identifies the anarchist answer being that, like, like we've just been saying, human beings are naturally cooperative, so it doesn't really matter. And he kind of identifies the Marxist solution as being, we will have a revolutionary takeover of the state, and then we'll develop the productive forces until we can have communism. And sorry, the working class, but you're going to have to, like, live under a totalitarian worker state until we're able to do that. Now, clearly, we're dealing with a person who's had a particular experience with the authoritarian wing of the communist movement. Like, he was in the Communist Party and he left and became an anarchist because of this experience of Stalinism. But to me, as I was reading this, I was like, is this sort of like quite a gross or potential misrepresentation of Marx? Because also he's taken the classic anarchist line of, like, Marx, he doesn't recognize that the state is bad and he wants to take over the state and blah, 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 whatever. I don't know.
But it's like, remember when Marx was like having that famous interaction with Bakunin, and Bakunin was like, oh, so what, Marx? Everybody's going to run the state? Everybody's going to be a part of the state? Marx was like, yeah, everybody's going to be a part of the state. Bakunin was like, oh, how dare you, sir?
Yes, exactly. And, like, I was having this sort of thing of, like, the understanding I've sort of come to is that, like, okay, if we're going to require some kind of proletarian state, if we're going to have a dictatorship of the proletariat to oversee the transition to communism, the way I've come to think about it is this maybe you'll need to have a revolutionary state to actually undergo the process of changing social relations. Whereas he's painting it as, we need to have a revolutionary state to transform the sort of material, technical, productive process, which is a narrative that was, like, self-believed by large portions of the communist movement at this time, as I understand it. So it's not a surprise that he's portraying Marxist communism like this. The other thing it raised for me, and we've not talked about this in a while, so I'm not quite sure where you stand with it, is I still like to entertain this idea that socialism or communism is possible at any point. Like, it's just a reorganization of the economy so that workers are in direct control. And it doesn't require any particular development in technology. It doesn't require any particular development in scale. You know, it's not tied to a large enough monopoly coming about. We don't need to have all industry monopolized under the state before we can have socialism. It's about conscious, collective, democratic control of the economy and what would be the social structure that you'd have to put in place to allow that to flourish. Now, obviously, you can't have from each according to its ability to each according to its need communism in, like, 1820 or whatever, but, like, I don't know. Yeah.
I mean, at a certain point, it's just like, why is that conversation worth having? Because now,
I mean, we're now at the point where we clearly can have.
I'm kind of the mind where it's, I don't know. My definition now of communism is very much in line with the fundamental principles, ideas of, like, labor tokens and their views on how you break value and getting rid of private production and all of this stuff. So it's kind of hard for me to, like, read all the way back into history that you could have communism at any point. Mm-hmm. Maybe you could. I don't know. I mean, there have been communities, like, some people define hunter-gatherer societies of some sort of quote-unquote primitive communism, so maybe you could then. But again, kind of doesn't really matter, because at this point, like, yeah, we could. What was that?
Yeah. I mean, I should clarify, I mean communism at any point after capitalism came about.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, what has capitalism done? We don't want to get teleological. I guess we just want to explain what's actually happened, so we can say, what has capitalism actually done? It's socialized production and it's built up the productive forces. Maybe once we had the steam engine, everything would have just been fine, because at that point they really start to abstract away from space and time and really put people in, like, the factory system, blah, 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 blah. I mean, I want to touch on too that like exactly what you're saying. It's the kind of typical anarchist versus Marxist versus communist battle of the time and still of now, which makes no sense. Of like Marx thought this about the state. No, he didn't. Marx thought this about the state. And I will say though, it is very funny in this. It's a bit blatant because it's like when he talks about Marx's views on technology right before this discussion, he's quoting Marx and he's like, here's what Marx thought. Wow, wasn't he correct on technology? And then he's like, and then Marx wanted a big evil state. And then he just doesn't quote Marx ever again. And he starts quoting like all of these other people, everybody but Marx, when he's like, Marx just wanted this big centrally planned economy. It's like, can I get any quote from Marx where he talks about that? You know what I mean? So that was fairly transparent, I think, trying to see what he was doing there. But, you know, I started to sympathize him much more when he started talking about Marxists and not Marx, because he's right that Marxists have views like this. He's right that most Marxists take their views from some form of social democracy, whether that's, I don't know, Kautskyism or whatever, or like Leninism or the Stalinists of his time, who were like, we just need to have this form of organization, you know, that eventually just gets led by this vanguard. And we just industrialize and we do all of these things until we get to the point where we can just provide for everybody. But obviously, because of, you know, whether that's systems theory about bureaucracies self-perpetuating themselves, or whether it's about those forms of ideology not particularly understanding what it is that makes capitalism, right? In terms of value production and private ownership and production for exchange and things like that. Like, I don't know. That's kind of a whole different conversation. But like, yeah, I don't think we necessarily need to defend the idea of that Bookchin is putting forward that Marx believes, because A, it isn't what Marx believes, and B, it's kind of silly. You know, he tends to think that Marx just wanted state control, whereas, and to, you know, give him some credit, he gives out some guff to the anarchists too, where he's like, anarchists just act on faith, where, you know, give credit to Marxists, they don't do that, but also he is kind of like a little bit of faith, not such a bad thing, you know what I mean? So it's very funny. It's very he's ping-ponging me back and forth as I was reading this. I was like, okay, well, you're wrong about that, but you're right about this. So I do enjoy this essay.
And also, you are Murray Bookchin, so
yeah, exactly. Oh man, dude, I was watching some interviews with him. He is just like, he's all-time character. He's like first ballot Hall of Fame communist character. He's just so funny, dude. Well, okay, so to tie it back to the technology stuff, to kind of get back to what you were saying, he basically says, he doesn't use the word Stalinism, but we'll just say Stalinism just because, right, to make it easier. Basically says that because of Stalinism and this, you know, experience of the Soviet Union that he was still living under, socialism becomes to be very tied to this idea of industrialization and of industry, right? And of, you know, the machine tractor and, you know, the production line and modern technology and all of these things. And he basically says that, then this gets into his actual views on technology and not just his criticisms of other people's real or pretend views on technology. He basically says that this is a very quantitative view of technological development. It's more tractors, it's more production lines, it's more automation. Whereas he says, and he is right about this, that we need to be thinking about qualitative change in technological development. You know, socialist technology will be technology that is qualitatively different and that it will be put to different uses, right? The end goal of technology under socialism will be just creating use values that we decide on, that we need, right? It won't be just producing a bunch of random bullshit use values that we don't need, right? And you might, dear listener, say that's fairly obvious, duh. But when you actually, I think, draw the logic out of what he means by that, then you do start to see that technology is pretty qualitatively different when it's put to the goal of kind of like, he makes this distinction of when technology becomes used by humanity and not the other way around, not technology using humanity, right? We kind of came across a similar idea of this in the Christopher Caldwell, where he was talking about man as machine and determinism and all of this different stuff, mechanism. But Bookchin here is saying that because of, and he says industrialization and like modernism. He doesn't really even just say capitalism, which kind of drives me nuts. He's like urbanism and industrialization, which is like classic anarchist stuff, right? He says that because of this capitalist system, humans are basically appendages of machines and not the other way around, right? Which is true. And I found this stuff kind of hard to argue with.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And I mean, he well, maybe we'll come on to where he ends in the whole piece, because he sort of ends the whole piece with, okay, this is how we should reflect on human beings' relationship technology. This is what human beings' relationship technology should be. He sort of tells us what it would look like if, technology was an appendage of human creativity rather than human beings being the sort of appendage of technological diktat, I suppose. I did get very confused. There's a lot of it's in some ways it's hard for me to imagine what kind of society it is that he's trying to portray. It's almost like he's trying to, there's an extent to which what he's trying to do is say we'll have this hyper sort of almost like fully automated. He's a sort of, it's full automated communism he's championing,
Yeah,
right? Like
it is actually.
It's full automated communism, whereby human beings exist at the end of this, and not just as passive consumers, but as sort of like artistic, creative cultivators of the sort of the last step of the productive process, which makes things like, creates a sort of like aesthetically beautiful, enjoyable world to live in, kind of thing. And it almost feels like this is sort of like large scale, fully automated technological background sort of out of sight. And he criticizes a vision whereby human beings are just passive consumers of the outputs of a fully automated system. That's not what he's sort of championing. But for me, there's a lot of confusion because obviously this is Murray Bookchin. Like there's this sort of like small scale mutualist ethos that lies behind everything that he does. There's a middle section in this which we won't go into heavily because his technological examples are so out of date. But the thrust of what he's saying is like, one of the good things is technology is getting smaller. It's getting smaller scale. This is why I was saying he'd love like 3D printing, right? Because like everybody can have a 3D printer in their home. Like, there's an extent to which he wants to bring everything down to the smallest scale and then work up from there. He's not saying that everything should be small community. He's saying there should be some amount of artisan production. There should be some amount of like autarkic production in communities when it comes to producing everything. But he has particularly pointed things to say about agriculture. But then also he's not denying the possibility of having a sort of global integrated production system as well, or like at least a national economy production system as well. The only the point that I kept coming back to as I was reading this was like, how does this square with the fundamental principles model of what a socialist economy would look like? Because for me, that's my kind of like simple touchstone design, one that I think that I sort of pretend to understand. And what's so nice about it is like it's one model for economic interaction and exchange, I suppose, that includes sort of like production at all scales. But what it does is takes the present global, in an abstract sense, global, fully socialized state of production that capitalism has developed, and then tweaks it in a way which allows for social control over this otherwise socially complete totalized economy. There's nothing as simple in this And I think it's because he doesn't think perhaps that we're going to need some kind of like metric for exchange, that the people who wrote the fundamental principles think we're going to need some kind of accounting metric. And obviously they talk about labor tokens and the labor hour as being this metric for production and consumption. There's a degree to which there are elements in this which are going to be like, you make it yourself. There's going to be elements of from each according to their ability to each according to their need. In terms of like a sort of like totalizing model for an economic system, I was sort of like grasping to try and find something tangible in it, and it wasn't really there for me.
It's faith.
Faith, yes.
Yeah, it's faith. I mean, he makes this mistake. Everybody fucking makes this mistake. Stalinists make this mistake. It's a quantitative view of social change and of social relations. His view is economic decentralization. It's get enough people out into these little communes that he's talking about, give them enough technology on such a scale that they can control producing their own food. They can control on a socially controllable scale, which I guess is just like to him town hall meetings or whatever. They can control their blast furnaces. They can control certain things other than a handful of things that would have to be on like a much bigger scale, like mining or something like that, right? And that's his view. He's like, just give these communes enough economic power and mutual aid will pop its head up and everything will be fine. Now, again, like is maybe like the annoying communist, you have to be like, well, how are these goods being exchanged? What would make the people working in the farm or in the mine want to just give all of these people enough iron ore for this project that they want to do? And how the hell would you even control any kind of large scale project? How would you control completely revamping America's crumbling infrastructure, for example, right? Like Murray Bookchin would probably just be like, because people are cool, man. And that's a nice idea, but it's not reasonable.
Yeah. I mean, I guess something that I'd forgotten and just remembered now is like the framing that you can kind of apply to this is cybernetics. Like there are ways in which he talks about technology which clearly seem to be quite influenced by cybernetic thinking. I mean, he uses the phrase like cybernetized or something like that in terms of the process that's going to happen to workplaces and he sort of talks about like one of the things that he's identifying as being a development in technology which makes it potentially liberating is the development of forms of technology which are feedback mechanisms, right? Which you could read very heavily in the language of cybernetics. I spent a lot of time grappling with how do I interpret the sort of like the virtuousness of small scale for its own sake, because obviously there are versions of small scale thinking which can be quite regressive or problematic, and we'd want to criticize. By which I mean like championing small scale production, or like everything has to be produced locally, localism. Like it can have like a petty bourgeois inflection, or like a, I don't know, like yeah. But also the one way I can sort of like make virtuous in my head the idea of starting with a small scale is from a sort of a cybernetic standpoint of like start with the smallest unit first, and then keep all the competencies and the control at that unit if it can stay there, and only hand it over to a higher body if you need to. Like Murray Bookchin's writing in this essay doesn't go so far as spelling that out as a system, but I think there's perhaps a degree to which that would be an interesting lens through which to think about what he's saying.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And that's all true. That's all correct.
Yeah.
I mean, look, he just gives moral arguments for the commune, basically. I mean, he does talk about this is the only way that you can sustainably like steward your ecology and actually live where you're not just destroying things, which is true, right? To a certain extent. But I think a couple things on this. I would say, one, you can make an argument like what you're saying for small scale stuff like the commune. purely on cybernetics. You can make the cybernetic Stafford Beer argument, which is this is how you come to a theory of autonomy, is because you literally could not have the guy with the big brain planning the economy. It just wouldn't work. There's too much variety there. You need to bring it down to a smaller scale. You can make an ecological argument for it, right? That cities destroy the metabolic rift or whatever. And you could probably make some sort of political economic argument where there, hyper urbanization is a tendency of capitalism, and maybe with socialism we'd see something like that disappear. I think at the end of the day, though, it's kind of like, well, that's cool that that's what you think, Murray, and it might matter what I think, but it also doesn't, because what you have to do is give people the means to control our production scale socially and communally, give us common ownership of the means of production, and produce, and an economic measure that allows us to produce for utility. And then whatever people want to do, they'll do. Let them decide. You know what I mean? It's like, yeah, there are tendencies that will probably make, the commune or whatever, like the base, but it's like, maybe not. Maybe, like, people might just want to live in cities and make it work. It's kind of not really up to us. Like, there's a lot of kind of hyperfixation and a lot of socialist and anarchist and any kind of utopian thinking where it's like, and here's how it will work exactly. It's like, is that what people will want? I don't know that. You don't know that. That's why I like the fundamental principle stuff so much, because they just go, here's the framework. Here's how you can control production communally. It's the only way it's going to work. Figure everything else out as you want to, because, talk about placing trust in the class. It's like, people won't destroy their ecology if they don't have to, right? Like, and he makes this kind of bordering on mystical argument about like putting people back in touch with nature, which I do actually just buy.
You do?
But I do, to a certain extent. I buy him saying that. I think maybe he's not saying this. Social production will put people back in some kind of what's the word? I don't know. I don't want to say rhythm because I'll sound like an asshole, but like synthesis. It will make people, I don't know. It will make people recognize ecological destruction in a much easier way, because right now it's just it's not like there's a capitalist that's destroying the world. It's happening as a result of uncontrolled production. So when production's controlled, people will probably be a bit more in touch, but yeah.
Yeah, I responded very surprisingly. I was a bit shocked by how negatively I responded to the kind of like hippie elements of this.
Interesting.
And I'm not sure I really don't know where it came from. The only way I could sort of claw myself back from it was something similar to what you were saying, right? Like, the inputs from nature are a necessary input to all of human production, right? Human production is a relationship to nature. If we're going to be put in a position where we can consciously, socially control all facets of human economic activity in a sustainable ecological way, we're sort of going to have to maintain a constant eye or recognition of that fact, I suppose. But like but I don't know. There was. I don't know why I wanted to respond so negatively. I was just this kind of like, I don't know. Like it was. I felt like he was just going to tell me to like go into the woods and like.
You love the woods.
I do like the woods, and I do like the sea, and I don't know why. I don't know
look,
why.
let me try and defend it.
I think I was looking for like, I wanted a more like, a reflection on human beings' experience of nature, which felt progressive and sort of like dialectical in some ways, and not romantic. Exactly that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What I'll say is, we've had the conversation before, and just you and I, about like under socialism. Well, okay, I'll say this first. When you do not have anarchy in production, right? When you do not have uncontrolled production, when it is controlled and you're not getting your beef from somewhere in the southern hemisphere that's been packaged somewhere else and then got sent to you, there is going to be a certain amount of, oh, okay, I do recognize like the process that goes into this, right? And whether or not that is meet the cow that you are about to eat or whatever, right? I don't think really matters. They're like
every cut of steak comes with a picture of the cow.
Exactly. But that's the petty bourgeois bullshit that they try and do now to make you feel fine about like feedlots.
Just be a better consumer. It's like more informed consumerism, you know.
Exactly. But there is going to be a certain amount of, you're not probably, you could if the community decided on it, but you're probably not going to get a lot of strawberries in January in, you know, Svalbard or something like that, right? Like there is going to be a less of an abstractification of production where everything is just on demand and you can get it whenever you want. Because I would imagine, I don't know this for sure, I would imagine people wouldn't want that in the future. Maybe they do, maybe they don't. What I was going to say is that you and I have had the discussion before of like, under socialism, will everybody be vegan or vegetarian, or will nobody do it? Because it would make less sense, because now it's a much more sustainable thing, eating meat, and you'd probably want animals involved in lay farming and growing different crops and stuff like that, right? And maybe that's kind of where this romanticism is leading to, kind of something like that, where it's like, how involved are you in production and how much do you see? For him, it's all of it, right? So
I think that was maybe my problem. He's like, everybody will understand growing vegetables and they will also understand animal husbandry. And my vegan brain kicked in. I was like, no,
we will abolish animals.
We'll pet the cows. Yeah, we'll abolish the animals.
Yeah.
But it's a process of overcoming commodity fetishism. That is like, we've got to overcome the relationship that's me, the steak, and its cost, and that's the only thing that has to be taken into account. But rather, as conscious social actors, we're just going to have a much greater scope of the productive process, I guess.
Yeah, and what I will say is the economic decentralization is the cure for everything. You and I might kind of be like, oh, that's fucking dumb. That's obviously not how it works. But like, that is something that I think really needs to be kept in mind when you're talking about like third world socialism, because building people's capabilities to grow their own food, to not have to import everything, is just as important in the first world, I suppose, as it is in the third, right?
Yeah.
So,
I mean, if we were doing developmentalism now anyway, I mean, if you and I were responsible for developing it,
thank God we're not.
You wouldn't import Argentinian beef, right, or whatever, or Brazilian,
exactly,
for myriad reasons. But
many reasons, exactly. I think that the most important part of all of this, and I'm interested to know what you think, is his actual discussions of socialist technology and what it would look like, because it's like, as you say, Murray Bookchin being like the digital computer. There are analog computers, but there are also digital computers. It's like, this is useless. I kind of just skipped all of that. But when he starts talking about what machines would actually look like and what a liberatory technology that serves humanity looks like, I was so jazzed. I was like, this is kind of everything that I'm interested in, just in terms of like, well, I'll run down the things really quickly. He says that machines need to be versatile so that they can be made to do a bunch of different things, which he made sound easy. I'm interested to know how easy that actually is. Makes sense, though. He's like, tractors, they can do all sorts of things. Don't pigeonhole them, because tractors can put in fence posts as well as, till, which is like, yeah, okay, whatever. But he starts talking about how parts need to be replaceable, right? And that's how you get past planned obsolescence. Things need to be much more simple, right? There needs to be kind of like, he talks about getting rid of single purpose machines, which is interesting. And again, is kind of like, this will sort itself out as we start producing for use, and kind of isn't really worth guessing as to what these things will look like. But it's kind of fun to do that, right? It's like, well, hey, what will the socialist like button press look like? Will there just be one button? He kind of makes that assumption where he's like, the reason people can't understand all of production now is because it's too complicated. But if we can just simplify it, everybody will be able to make informed decisions and blah, 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 blah. But this is, I don't know, I'm so interested in this stuff. And I do kind of feel like to a certain extent, this is not only really important stuff, but also the kind of stuff that will get people actually excited about socialism. Because it's like, I don't know, if you can actually show people, you know, here's how a community of a given size could do X, Y, and Z. And it's like way more than you think it would be able to. Because the typical socialist idea is like, oh, if you want like technology, if you don't want to revert to the Stone Age, you're going to need to have massive fucking factories. You're going to need to have people working on Fordist production lines. You're going to need to have all this crazy stuff. But Bookchin is basically just saying you actually kind of don't. Like you can have blast furnaces of a certain size. You can have agriculture of a certain size. And people can have pretty
power generation.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I was surprised he was like, and controlled nuclear reactors. I didn't expect him to say that. I was like, oh, I thought he was like anti-nuclear guy, but what are you gonna do? That would come later, I guess. Yeah. Anyway, I love that technology stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, I guess it is a necessary intervention that he's making in a world whereby production seems to be becoming bigger and bigger and bigger and localized in bigger plants with a huge number of workers working in one place, like thoroughly under the control of like an employer or a manager or whatever. And also like production is moved all the way around the world so that you have no real relationship to it at all. And having it be relocalized is definitely like includes an empowering potential. And I was thinking about the sort of coming back to the cybernetic stuff. Like, I know, and in some respects, imagining a form of, because I guess it's all good and well saying, okay, under communism you'll have like total social control of the productive process, you know, but it's quite hard to imagine what that would look like. And you've still got to kind of like all workers aren't going to come together into some like combine all of their brain power in some kind of like greater algorithm that's just sort of like gonna. So it's still going to be done at at least a conceptual scale of a human brain, I guess. Obviously, one human doesn't have to know how to do everything, but like the closer it can get to a genuinely lived social scale, the better when it comes to actually instituting social control of productive forces, I guess. And with it, and I suppose the question that comes from that, and the one that he's proposing, is okay, in the process of a socialist transformation of social relations, we adopt the productive forces of capitalism, we adopt the sort of like technological legacy that it leaves us. What are we going to do with it? Seeking out those things which allow for what I've just described, what he describes as sort of like local conscious control, seeking out those elements of technology and consciously developing them is definitely something that a revolutionary community would seek to do, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. But I mean, I think the only other thing that I'd mention is just like, if we talk about technology as kind of mirroring under socialism, like mirroring what it looks like under capitalism, technology is used for production's sake. It's used for exchange, and it's used for just producing as much bullshit as possible of every type, of every color, of a clock with a clock in it, golf clubs with a clock in it, like everything that you could think of, right? Whereas he's saying like technology under socialism, the reason that it has these different qualities of like they're not obsolete, there's no planned obsolescence, they're very versatile, there's all this different stuff, is because like it is now supporting the flourishing of humanity. And he makes this really beautiful and I think absolutely correct he soapboxes a little bit where he's like this would allow for kind of a like return of some kind of maybe not even a return, maybe just like a creation of some kind of craftsmanship where like, you know, he pulls on William Morris, which I think is totally cool to do because he's like, everything's going to be made to be proud of and to be beautiful. And if not beautiful, then useful. You don't really need a beautiful, I don't know, zipper. You can just have a zipper. But if somebody wanted to make a beautiful zipper, like they absolutely could. Whereas now it's like, you're making beautiful zippers. How much does it cost to make that beautiful zipper? Where's your market? You know? And like,
yeah, how long till it wears out and you need to have
yeah,
another
exactly,
one? Or like,
exactly.
yeah.
And you know, he applies this in a really, really cool way to agriculture where he's like, food is going to be art too, dude. And it's like, hell yeah. Like, making actual healthy food, getting a bunch of heirloom varieties out there. That's kind of what socialism is. It's like allowing for this flourishing of human creativity. And he's saying that technology needs to be used and will be used as a support for that. And like,
yeah,
that's kind of it. That is what socialism is. Socialism is creating human flourishing. It's not about building up as much productivity as possible. It's about allowing for human flourishing.
And it almost feels like there are two things that he's seeking to overcome, right? One of them is all the fetters put on production by its capitalist nature and all the things that come along with that. You know, the built-in obsolescence, the making the cheapest thing rather than the most beautiful, they don't make the most versatile, or like I don't know, like that fits into production and consumption in a particular way. But also, what really underpins this is, okay, how are we going to get to a point where we actually overcome want? How do we overcome? And in some ways, he's redefining want, right? Because he's also painting a picture of developing a different relationship to things. There's a point in this where he almost champions having a fairly Spartan relationship to ownership. You know, like he paints capitalism as being this sort of fairly materialistic thing where people are about having and buying and hoarding. And he paints a picture of socialism, which will be crafting and giving almost, which was quite beautiful. But when you were saying about a zipper or something like that, there is if you live in a certain version of a society governed by some degree of material scarcity, maybe there's an argument for saying we have to make all zippers the same, because if we design a machine that makes them exactly the same, then we don't have to redesign them at the last bit to give everybody exactly what they want, kind of thing. But maybe if you get to a certain degree of material productive abundance, you can then craft everything to meet sort of like aesthetic wants or bespoke individual wants of every person who comes to own that thing. And it allows for this extra step of craftsmanship and creativity and sort of like human synthesis with technology, which allows them to have the most sort of aesthetic William Morris style arts and crafts. I don't know.
We'll all be pretty
zip
producers
on their hoodie, you know.
Yeah, exactly.
I can't even imagine what, like, just like, yeah. What are we imagining when we imagine? I don't know. Somebody's deepest, darkest,
zipper need.
most base, unconscious,
yeah, exactly,
desires poured into a zip. Anyway.
Yeah, Dan's been reading about psychoanalysis recently. Yeah. I mean, but also, like, I know I've said this a couple times now, but it's like, maybe that's what people will want. Maybe people will just want one zipper. Maybe they'll want a million zippers. Who am I? Who is Murray Bookchin to decide? Yeah, exactly. It's like, who are we to decide? People will figure that one out. I am of the mind that people will probably be like, why would I need more than one zipper? The communist standard zipper is more than fine by me. If my commune decides I would like a slightly different zipper, tell that to the zipper factory and they'll do it. You know what I mean? But like,
no, I think we'll have fully automated production that meets everybody's needs, so that everybody can sit at home in their sort of like 3D computer design and create so many different downloadable files for zippers that everybody can print whatever possible zip design they could want on
Communism
their own
is Wall-E
3D printer.
with 3D printers. That's what it is. Yeah. I mean, maybe people
we're all going to sit in the hovering chairs, like creating rather than consuming.
Getting fat and just creating,
and doing computer aided design.
Yeah. Well, I enjoyed this. It's Murray Bookchin. It's a little bit. What are you talking about? But it's also like anarchists. All right by me. You know what I'm saying? Like, this stuff is all cool. It's good to remind yourself that it's like you're not actually that different. Like, it's good stuff.
Yeah, and it's a really enjoyable synthesis of the like really materially grounded and the somewhat utopian fantasizing, and it's sort of thoroughly needed. It's the necessary fodder that sort of like nourishes a revolutionary mind, I guess. So.
Yeah, totally needed. Love it. And again, he hits the nail on the head. A lot of socialists forget this, but like the point of socialism is human flourishing. That's it. Everything else is secondary. You know what I mean? So that's just what we have to remember. Dan, we do have Murray Bookchin actually on the phone here to tell us what he actually wants in terms of a socialist society, an anarchist society, an eco-anarchist society. So why don't we just listen into what Murray Bookchin wants? Here he is. Ladies and gentlemen, Murray Bookchin.
In short, placing a military discipline on people and thereby creating what amounts to ecological fascism.
Wow, you heard it from him first. Murray Bookchin wants ecological fascism. That's not what I expected. Oh my God.
I imagined you accidentally hitting the Louis Althusser button on there.
Oh, I keep meaning to make that button. I did download the file. What are you going to do? I heard that. I was watching some Murray Bookchin videos and I was just like, I'm going to take that out of context.
Murray Bookchin, the ecological fascist, and Louis Althusser, the anarchist.
Exactly. That is the auxiliary statements understanding of communist canon.
Yes. Yes, thank God our listeners know better than we do.
Yeah, exactly. No kidding. Well, all right. Well, I had fun with that. New year, new us. We're reading Murray Bookchin.
But in a new way.
Yeah, now we say fundamental principles 3 times an episode as opposed to never saying it. So, all right. Well,
we wouldn't. Thank you, Jack. It's been great.
It's been very fun. We'll have something good next time. Dan and I are talking about maybe balancing it out with something that more communists will enjoy. Maybe we'll actually read State and Revolution. Haha, unless. See everybody next time.
Bye-bye.
Hey everybody, Jack here. Thank you so much for listening to this week's episode. The song that you heard on this episode is Music to Kill Bad People To by King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard. You can go ahead and check this song out much more on their Bandcamp at kinggizzard.bandcamp.com. If you want to go ahead and get in touch with us, chat shit, tell us that we're wrong, whatever you want to do, you can go ahead and do that at auxiliarystatements@gmail.com. You can just send us a message there, or you can get in touch with us on Twitter, on Discord, on Instagram. You're a smart person. You can find these places. We got a YouTube. We post stuff there as well. Sometimes we stream. Thank you so much for listening. Till next time.